as we finish up the information for test number 2, we're going to discuss 3 personality disorders. We're going to do 3 personality disorders and then 1 anxiety disorder. And what's going to happen in abnormal psychology is we're going to talk about a general personality disorder here, and then we're going to find out that it branches off into different disorders itself. So the first one is schizoid. S-C-H-I-Z-O-I-D, schizoid. Now that doesn't have anything to do with schizophrenia. That's something entirely different. This is schizoid, S-C-H-I-Z-O-I-D. Schizoid is a personality disorder where we have a detachment from social relationships. The person becomes a total loner. Just the social relationships of other people make them very nervous, and they just avoid those. And so once again, schizoid, personality disorder, detachment from social relationships, and then restricted range of emotions. So when we say restricted range of emotions, which means that they're going to be in one emotion most of the time. This is going to be just this non-excitable person. We're going to talk about something called lethargic later, and lethargic is where a person doesn't move or react much at all. This isn't lethargic. This is a restricted range of emotions. So somebody that doesn't show hardly any emotions, detached from social relationships, and this is an interesting disorder because schizoid ties into a lot of different disorders. The question is, why does somebody become schizoid? And once again, in all of these disorders, it's going to be a combination of environmental and genetic. And so we're not sure on personality disorders how many of them are truly genetic. So it's really a tough call. We do know that schizoid disorders often occur when a person has something very dramatic happen in the area of trust and mistrust. Wow. Well, that's kind of interesting because that can happen throughout your whole life, but it can also happen when you're an infant. It can also, from birth to 1 year old, we do a lot of mistrust issues. So it's kind of interesting. So somebody that's schizoid, once again, you need to know that's a personality disorder. They have detachment from social relationships and restricted range of emotions. That's the first one. Now the second one, I put on a piece of paper because it's kind of a long spelling word. It's narcissistic. Okay? Narcissistic. N-A-R-C-I-S-S-I-S-S-I-T-I-C. Narcissistic. So narcissistic, and maybe you've heard of this, maybe you haven't, but we talked about schizoid, we talked about narcissistic, we're going to talk about paranoid personality disorder. And remember, in order to have an abnormal disorder, it's got to have the symptoms, and it's got to be visible and present for 30 consecutive days. So could you imagine, you have situations where you might become schizoid temporarily, where you just become a loner, have a restricted range of emotions. Something bad could happen to you, and you just could go into this schizoid nosedive for a while. Narcissistic is classified as a personality disorder. Narcissistic is an overly exaggerated view of yourself. An overly exaggerated view of yourself. Sometimes it's described as a grandiose view of yourself. It's an over need for admiration. The problem that we have with somebody that's narcissistic is we look and we say, well, this person has a really high self-confidence, and that in itself is not really a bad deal. But we got to look at this imbalance. What's a psychological disorder? 30 consecutive days. Well, here's the kicker for narcissistic. Some people, and you might even know somebody that you think really has a grandiose feel of themselves, an over-exaggerated, and in the book it even says a fantasy of themselves, that they're so much better than they are, whether it's better looking, smarter, whatever it is. Narcissistic is this personality disorder where they have an overinflated view of themselves. But here's the kicker. The kicker is somebody that's narcissistic has a lack of empathy. Now, this is big. When we study abnormal psychology, sympathy is where we feel for somebody, we feel sorry for somebody. Somebody has a death in the family, we send them a sympathy card. Man, we're so sorry that happened. And sympathy is a feeling where we feel, we recognize that they feel bad. But empathy, this is a big one, because a lot of personality disorders have lack of empathy. Empathy is where we can't feel what you're feeling. We can't feel what you're feeling. Lack of empathy is somebody who, somebody's having a death in the family, something like that, and they don't recognize that person feels sad. And they certainly don't feel bad that person feels bad. They might even be laughing and joking and not even realize that what they're doing is actually really showing. It's so distasteful because the other person's like, "Don't you know how I feel?" And the answer is, if you have lack of empathy, you don't know how that person feels. So, wow. Now we're going to start talking about. We're going to get into a lot of these things. We're going to talk about lack of empathy. This is what's dangerous in our society. If I have, we talked about it just a little bit in Psychology 101, but if I have a lack of empathy, then I don't really understand how you hurt, and it's not even that I don't care that you hurt. I just can't relate to it at all. I mean, I can't even understand. So if I'm going to kind of go extreme here, but if somebody has a lack of empathy and they go out and they hurt somebody, we're like how could somebody go out and, we can mention some of the heinous crimes that people do. We say, how could somebody do that? Wouldn't they, how could they do that? Well, you couldn't do it because you would be like, doing that to that person would hurt so much, and you can almost see yourself, and they're like, wow, I would hate for somebody to do that to me. But a lack of empathy, they don't even realize, they don't even know how that person hurts or how that person thinks. So a lot of the really what we call heinous crimes that we couldn't even fathom in our own minds, are done by people that have this disorders, and not just narcissistic, but other disorders that have a lack of empathy. How could I go out and kill somebody? How could I go out and do these things that you couldn't even think? How could I do something like this to somebody? Well, if you didn't think and you didn't understand somebody else's feelings, and you just totally were void of how they hurt or how they feel, if they're happy, if they're sad, if they're mad, if they're glad, and you just can't have any empathy, then you don't have any feeling for that person, so that person then becomes totally non-objective. So narcissistic, once again, I want to make it like narcissistic's going to go out and be a murderer or anything, but we do start with this personality disorder where they have a lack of empathy, and somebody that's narcissistic does not have a feeling of how somebody else is feeling. The next personality disorder we have is a paranoid personality disorder. Now, paranoid personality disorder is a distrust of other people. And paranoid personality disorder, once again, remember, it's got to be 30 consecutive days of symptoms to be classified as an abnormal disorder. But this distrust of other people becomes suspicious behavior from other people. So this particular person is always thinking beyond. They're always suspicious. They always have distrust. One particular, had some exposure to a paranoid personality disorder person one time, and this person told me that I need to be really careful when I go into the post office, because they're recording everybody, and that when you walk around town, the street lights are cameras, and they're watching us constantly, that I want to be careful because somebody is filming them all the time. And that's pretty typical of a paranoid personality disorder. Constant, suspicious, constant lack of trust. So once again, the three personality disorders that you'll have on your test are schizoid, narcissistic, and paranoid personality disorder. So you need to be able to tell about those three. Now, then we're going to go into one anxiety disorder This is obsessive compulsive personality disorder. So sometimes people say, oh, you're really OCD. Well, OCD, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, is an anxiety disorder when you have persistent thoughts or impulses that dominate your time and your energy. So as a result of these impulsive thoughts and actions, then you become, or impulsive thoughts and constant dwelling on things, then you come up with repetitive actions. One study that we study in this class, and we'll talk about a little bit in our case study, is this guy that goes off to college that really is kind of a germaphobe, and so he washes his hands all the time. Well, he gets to where he washes his hands all the time. He gets to where every time he sees a doorknob, he's thinking, man, that's so dirty, I can't stand it. And then every time he sees a desk, and every time he sees something. So what happens, a true story with this guy, he has obsessive compulsive personality disorder. He goes to college. He's in a situation where there's just, he's walking to class, he's away from home, and he's thinking, man, this stuff's just really dirty, And so his impulsive thoughts all the time are, I'm getting all these germs. So he gets to where he can't pass a bathroom without stopping to wash his hands. But when he washes his hands, he's so obsessive about it that he has a system where it takes him about 5 to 10 minutes to wash his hands. So once again, what is this? It's this persistent thought and impulse to wash his hands. And so then it's repetitive action. So he would take off and he would go to his class, and then he would pass another restroom and he would be like, oh gosh, I've got to go in again. And every time he got to a restroom, he had to wash his hands. And so you can imagine what happened. It got to be so compulsive that he eventually dropped out of college. We don't know what happened to him after that. But until he was able to get those impulsive thoughts out of his mind and quit worrying about washing his hands all the time, there's actually a little more to that story, I should say. While he was in college, he went to a psychiatrist to get some help, and they trained him that washing his hands is bad. And so guess what? Because he's obsessive compulsive disorder, so then he got to where not washing his hands was this impulsive thing that he had to avoid, and so he never washed his hands. As a matter of fact, he didn't even take a bath. He stayed away from sinks, and he just went exactly opposite to where he just became totally filthy with bacteria and all the things that bothered him, because his obsessive compulsive disorder swapped over to absolutely stay away from water to avoid washing his hands. So that's pretty typical. Once again, obsessive compulsive disorder, you'll have that on your test. It's an anxiety disorder, persistent thoughts and impulses, and repetitive actions. So that finishes up test number 2. I'll go through all the videos, study that. It's not too bad of a test, and I'll see you for the next video.